had been planning the solo hike for weeks. It wasn't some dramatic attempt to find myself or escape life. It was just something I enjoyed. I liked being away from everything. No cars, no phones, no fake smiles. Just trees, dirt, and that crunch under my boots. I chose the trail because it wasn't too popular. That was the whole point. I wanted to be alone. The area was remote, a stretch of trail network tucked deep in the forested hills of Idaho. I'd found it on an old hiking blog that hadn't been updated in years. Some locals still used parts of the network for hunting, but the main trails hadn't seen many hikers in a long time. That was part of the appeal for me. Less foot traffic meant more peace. I like solitude. I trusted my experience. I started early on a Thursday morning. The forecast had said mild weather, no rain, and I had about 3 days of supplies in my pack. Enough food, a good water filter, extra socks, and my emergency gear. Nothing fancy, just what I'd need. I parked at a small dirt pull-off where the trail began. My car was the only one there. At first, the hike was everything I wanted. The trail cut through dense forest, then opened into long ridgelines with views of the valley below. The sun rose slow through the pines, and everything smelled like damp moss and pine needles. I stopped every now and then to rest, drink water, eat some jerky, check my map. I was following a loop that curved out west before bending back around north and east to return to the car. Roughly 30 miles total. Not a brutal hike, but enough to test me. By early evening, I reached a flat spot just off the trail, next to a dry creek bed. It looked like an old campsite with a half-burned fire ring and some logs people had dragged into a circle years ago. I pitched my tent, cooked a quick meal, and fell asleep fast, tired from the steady climb. The first night was peaceful. I remember waking up around 2 a.m. to pee and stepping out into air so still it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. The sky was clear. I could see stars through the trees. No wind, no sounds. It was beautiful and I felt calm. The second day started the same way. Quiet, clean, peaceful. I kept moving west on the loop. Around noon, I came to a junction where the trail split. My map said the right path was a shortcut, steeper, but it would shave off a few miles. I don't know why I hesitated. Maybe it was just instinct. Something about the shortcut felt off. It looked less maintained, but I was feeling good, and the idea of making better time tempted me. I took the shortcut. The trail narrowed quickly. Trees pushed in tighter, and the sunlight barely reached the ground. The forest got denser and the terrain rougher. I had to step over fallen logs and duck under low branches. The shortcut was more of a deer trail. I checked my map again. It was marked barely, but it was there. I kept going. It was slow but manageable. Then I stepped on something that didn't feel like dirt. My foot sank. I looked down and saw that I'd stepped into a hole, hidden by leaves and pine needles. My ankle twisted as I fell forward. Sharp pain shot through my leg, and I hit the ground hard, scraping my hands and shoulder. I laid there for a minute, breathing fast, feeling the pain grow in my ankle. I didn't think it was broken, but I wasn't sure. I sat up slowly, took off my boot, and winced. My ankle was swelling fast. I wrapped it tight using my first aid kit, took some ibuprofen, and tried to stand. It hurt like hell, but I could put weight on it. Barely. I sat there for a while thinking I could go back, but it would be uphill and slower, or I could push forward and rejoin the main trail sooner. I didn't want to turn around. That was my mistake. I kept going. Every step was pain. The trail got even worse, narrower, steeper, barely a path at all. I stopped often. My leg throbbed, and the light was starting to fade. I hadn't covered much ground. I knew I needed to find a place to stop for the night. Around sunset, I came across a strange clearing. It looked like a logging site, old and used, with stumps and rusted equipment scattered around. A broken-down trailer sat at the far end, tilted sideways like it had sunken into the ground. No recent tracks, no trash. It looked abandoned for years. I didn't like it, but I was too tired to keep going. I set up camp at the edge of the clearing, far from the trailer. I ate quickly, didn't light a fire, and crawled into my tent. The pain in my leg kept me awake. I kept hearing noises too. Not animals, not wind, Just sounds, branches cracking, slow crunches like someone walking, but they were far off, always far off, too regular for animals, too heavy. But every time I sat up and listened, it stopped. Then I'd lie back down, and the noises would start again. I didn't sleep much. When morning came, the forest looked the same. Still, calm, but I packed up fast and moved on. The trail faded completely. I was bushwhacking now. My map was almost useless, and the terrain was all overgrown. I started to feel like I'd made a serious mistake. I kept checking my compass, trying to move northeast to reconnect with the main trail. My ankle burned with every step. Then I found the boot. It was lying just off a faint trail, half buried in leaves. Old, weathered, torn open at the side. Looked like it had been there a while. I stopped and stared at it. It wasn't mine. I hadn't seen another person for 2 days. There were no other tracks, but the boot was here. I should have turned around. I should have gone back, but I didn't. Later that afternoon, I found a jacket hanging in a tree, just one sleeve torn, sun-bleached and frayed. No name, no tags, no sign of who left it. I started feeling watched. It's not something I can explain with logic. I didn't hear or see anything, but I felt it, like someone was behind the trees, always just behind the trees. I stopped eating much. I stopped resting. I just wanted to get out. That night, I didn't set up camp. I leaned against a tree with my sleeping bag pulled over me. Too scared to lie down. Too scared to close my eyes. Every crack in the woods made me jump. Every gust of wind sounded like a breath on my neck. In the morning, I kept moving. Then I found the trap. It was crude. Wires strung between branches, half hidden under leaves. I didn't see it until I was almost in it. A snare, not for animals, too high off the ground. It was meant for legs or maybe necks. I froze. My stomach dropped. My hands were shaking. I backed away slowly. Then I saw another snare 10 feet to the left. And another. Someone had set these. A lot of them. That's when I panicked. I started running even though my ankle was wrecked. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. I was crashing through brush, branches tearing at my clothes, tripping, falling, getting up again. I kept running until I couldn't breathe. Then I stumbled into another clearing. A big one this time. At the center of the clearing, there was a pile of things. Backpacks, dozens of them, all torn open, faded, some covered in moss. Boots, water bottles, a broken GPS, a shattered phone, a ripped sleeping bag. I knew what I was looking at. I didn't want to, but I did. People had come through here before. People who didn't make it out. I turned around and ran again. I ran like something was chasing me, though I never saw anything. I didn't stop until I reached a stream. I followed it, hoping it would lead me out. My ankle was useless now. I was half crawling. Then I heard the noise. It wasn't footsteps this time. It was humming, a slow, quiet hum, coming from somewhere in the trees. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I crouched in the water, heart racing, trying to stay quiet. The humming kept going, then faded. I stayed there for hours, hidden in the cold water, shivering, barely moving. When the sun started to go down again, I moved. Slowly, I followed the stream all night, dragging my leg, slipping on wet rocks, covered in bruises. I didn't stop. By morning, I saw something that almost made me cry. A road, a dirt road, but a road, with tire tracks. I stumbled onto it and started walking. I didn't know where it led. I didn't care. Took hours, but eventually, I heard an engine. A truck came around the bend, and I waved both arms, limping into the road. The driver stopped. He looked shocked. I must have looked like hell. Soaked, scraped up, filthy, wild-eyed. He gave me a ride into the nearest town. I didn't say much. I didn't explain. I didn't report anything. I just went home. I still have the scars. My ankle never fully healed. I get nightmares sometimes. Forests don't feel the same anymore. I don't hike alone now, and I don't go off the trail, because somewhere out there, deep in those woods, something isn't right. And I was lucky to make it out. I needed a break from the city. Everything had started to feel like noise, cars, screens, texts, endless updates. Even my apartment didn't feel like a home anymore. It was just a box that kept me in. So I took some time off work and decided to go on a solo hike. No group, no friends, just me, a pack, and the trail. I found this place online. It wasn't popular, and that was part of the reason I chose it. It was supposed to be peaceful. A lightly trafficked trail through a remote section of a national forest. The photos looked beautiful. Steep hills, quiet lakes, long valleys lined with pine trees. It was a 5-day loop. I figured it would be tough, but I was in decent shape and I had done plenty of hikes before, just not alone. This one felt different, and I told myself that was a good thing. The trailhead started about 2 hours from the nearest town. Once I parked and locked up, it was just me and the trail. The first day went by fine. The sun was out, not too hot. I followed the winding path that climbed slowly through the trees. My backpack was heavy, but manageable. I had everything: tent, water filter, stove, bear spray, GPS beacon, printed map, first aid kit, even backup batteries. By early evening, I found a small clearing near a creek. I set up camp, filtered some water, cooked a quick meal, and lay down in my tent listening to the sound of the trees moving in the wind. I fell asleep pretty quickly. The next morning I packed up and kept going. The trail took me higher into the mountains. Cell service had vanished a long time ago. That didn't bother me. I liked the silence. The trail narrowed in places and some parts were washed out or overgrown, but the map kept me on track. It was wild country out there. No people, no buildings, no sound except birds and the occasional crack of branches above me. Sometime in the afternoon, I came to a fork that wasn't on my map. There were no trail markers, no signposts, just 2 paths. One looked slightly more traveled than the other, but both went deep into the trees. I checked my map again and tried to match the shape of the trail with the ridgelines around me. I thought the left fork was right, based on the direction of the sun and the slope. I took it. Felt wrong about 20 minutes in. The trail narrowed even more and started to climb steeply. My legs were burning, and the terrain was rocky and uneven. There was no trail sign, no blazes on trees. The more I walked, the more I realized this wasn't a trail at all. Maybe it was an old animal path. But by that point, I had gone too far to turn around easily. I thought if I just kept going, I'd meet back up with the trail eventually. I didn't. That night, I camped on a sloped ridge. I had to clear away some rocks to make room for the tent. I was exhausted and sore. My left ankle felt off, just a little sore from the uneven ground, I figured. I ate dinner and looked at my map again, trying to figure out where I was. The trees were too thick to see the stars clearly, and without cell signal or GPS, I had nothing but the old-fashioned way to guess. By the 3rd morning, it was clear I was lost. I didn't panic. Not at first. I packed up, marked the direction I had come from using a small stack of stones, and moved on in the direction I thought would take me back toward the loop trail. The ground was rough and uneven. There was no real path anymore. I was bushwhacking through brush, ducking under low branches, climbing over fallen logs, scratching up my arms and legs as I pushed through. Around midday, I found an old fire ring, rocks in a circle, blackened in the middle. That was the first sign of human presence I'd seen in a day and a half. It gave me hope, like maybe I wasn't as far off as I thought. But after that, the forest swallowed everything again. The terrain dipped and rose wildly. I climbed down into a ravine that smelled like wet moss and dead leaves, and then up the other side using roots as handholds. My ankle throbbed with each step now. I started rationing my food. I had planned for 5 days, but now I wasn't sure how long I'd be out here. I still had water and the creek wasn't too far, but I knew water didn't mean much if I couldn't find my way out. I turned on my GPS beacon, but the trees were thick, and it wasn't sending a signal. By the 4th day, my ankle was swollen. I wrapped it tight, but I couldn't walk as fast anymore. My leg was stiff, and every step sent sharp pain up to my knee. I was moving slower, getting more tired. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my pack felt heavier than ever. I could hear things in the woods, birds, yes, but other things too. Cracks, thumps, something moving through the brush. Probably deer, maybe a bear. I kept the bear spray close and made noise when I moved. That night, I built a fire. It wasn't for warmth, it was hot even in the woods, but for the comfort. Something about the flickering light made me feel less alone. I sat beside it with my map in my lap, trying to orient myself again, drawing lines with my finger. I didn't recognize anything. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from tiredness, hunger, and frustration. I hadn't seen another human in 4 days. My GPS still wasn't working, and the battery was half drained now. I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up to the sounds outside my tent. Sticks snapping, leaves rustling. Maybe animals, maybe wind. Maybe I was just on edge. I lay awake for long stretches, just staring at the nylon ceiling of the tent, listening, sweating, waiting for morning. On the 5th day, I ran out of food. I had a few energy gels left and a handful of nuts, but the real meals were gone. My ankle was worse. I could barely put weight on it. I leaned on a long stick I had found to use as a crutch. The ground was rough and I kept falling. At one point, I slid down a slope and scraped my elbow bad. It bled a bit and I had to wash it in a muddy puddle. I wrapped it with gauze from my kit. I didn't even know what direction I was going anymore. The sun was blocked by thick clouds, and every hill looked like the last. I tried to climb a tree at one point to get a better view, but I didn't make it far before my leg gave out. I lay on my back staring up at the branches, catching my breath, wondering how far I was from anyone. I hadn't heard a plane overhead in days. The air was dead quiet. That evening, I found something strange. I was following a dry creek bed when I saw a metal pole sticking out of the ground. It looked like an old fence post, rusted, bent. I followed it and found more. An old fence line, broken in places, swallowed by undergrowth. Beyond it was a flat patch of ground, and something that looked like the remains of a cabin. Just the rotting outline of a foundation and a few beams, maybe the frame of a collapsed roof. It felt eerie not because of ghosts or anything like that, but because it meant someone had lived here once, or tried to. It looked abandoned for decades. I poked around, careful where I stepped. I found an old rusted bucket, half buried in dirt, and what looked like part of a metal stove. I sat on a fallen beam, resting. I didn't know what direction to take anymore, but the old structure made me feel a little safer. Like at least I had something between me and the open woods. I stayed there that night. I didn't pitch my tent. I just laid my mat and sleeping bag beside the beams and kept my knife close. The fire I built was small but steady. I stayed awake most of the night again, eyes open, ears alert. I heard more movement in the woods, closer this time. Stopped me cold, every time. I kept my hand on the bear spray. Nothing came close, but it felt like something was circling, watching. Maybe it was just paranoia. By the 6th day, I could barely walk. My ankle had turned purple, and the skin felt tight. My ribs showed when I lifted my shirt, and my mouth was dry no matter how much water I drank. I thought about using the emergency beacon again, but I had no idea if it was sending anything. Still, I pressed the SOS button again and kept it on my pack. I started following the sun, trying to move east. The map had shown a service road out that way, maybe 10 miles from the loop trail. If I was where I guessed, I might be close. It was a long shot, but it gave me something to move toward. I dragged myself over hills, through brush, over fallen logs. My legs were shaking with every step. That night, the clouds broke, and I saw the stars. I lay there in my bag and stared up at them. I hadn't cried yet, not once, but that night I did. I cried quietly, because I was too weak to do anything else. I felt like I might not make it out. I had no food, no strength, and I didn't know if anyone was even looking for me. I had told my coworker where I was going, and when I planned to be back, but that was a week ago now. Maybe someone was looking. On the 7th day, I found the road. It wasn't paved, just a thin, rough strip of gravel barely visible through the grass and branches. But it was a road. I followed it with everything I had left. It felt like walking through a dream. Trees all around, but the ground was flat, even. No roots to trip me, no brush to tear my arms. I walked for hours. Sometime in the afternoon, I heard it, a low hum, then tires, a truck. It started like every other solo trip I'd taken over the past few years. I wasn't new to hiking, but I wasn't some expert survivalist either. I was just a regular guy who liked being out in nature, walking long distances, spending a few days alone with my thoughts, carrying my gear, and watching the world slow down a little. This one was supposed to be a 3-day loop in northern Utah, not far from the Wyoming border. The trail wasn't well known, but it wasn't unmarked either. I'd picked it because of the scenery, thick lodgepole pines, long stretches of high meadow, and a few alpine lakes that barely anyone ever visited. I'd gone through my usual routine, map printed and packed, route loaded onto my GPS app, enough food, water filter, extra socks, bear spray, emergency beacon, and a light sleeping bag since the forecast said lows in the 40s. Seemed like the perfect early fall trip. No snow, no crowds. I parked at the trailhead around 9 a.m., signed into the box with my name, date, and intended loop, and got moving. The air was crisp, the kind of chill that keeps you alert but feels good when your pack is snug and your boots are biting the trail just right. Day 1 was everything I wanted. I didn't see a single person. I hiked about 11 miles with a slow gain in elevation. Around 5 p.m., I found a small patch of flat ground beside a stream, set up my tent, filtered some water, ate a simple meal, and watched the trees go dark as the sky faded from orange to deep navy. It was the kind of quiet that makes you notice your own heartbeat. I slept well. No wind, no animal noises, no weird dreams. The next morning, I broke camp early and followed the loop north. The forest was a little denser on this side, and I knew from the map that I had to cross a few small ridgelines. There were some switchbacks and a lot of deadfall across the trail, but I kept moving. Sometime after lunch, maybe around 2 p.m., I came to a fork in the trail. One side looked like the main trail continued uphill. The other cut more sharply to the right and seemed to stay level. The sign was broken. One part lay face down in the dirt. I picked it up and brushed off the dirt. The letters were faded, but I could barely make out what looked like an arrow and the words "Cut OFF" carved into the wood. I knew from my printed map that there was an old cutoff trail that rejoined the main loop a few miles ahead. It was supposed to be faster, saving about an hour of climbing. That old trail wasn't well maintained, and I'd read on a forum that it had been closed for a few years but was still passable. I hesitated for a bit, trying to gauge the condition just from looking. Seemed fine, narrow but not overgrown. I figured if it got bad, I could turn back. I was making good time and didn't feel tired, so I took the cutoff. The first half mile was uneventful. It dipped into a small ravine and then ran alongside a creek for a bit. I liked that part. It was quiet, shaded, and I didn't even have to stop to refill my water. The stream was flowing fast and clear, and I made a mental note to top off later. But after that, the trail started to thin out. The trees grew thicker, the sun started fading through the canopy above, and the trail itself got harder to follow. Sometimes it looked like just a faint depression in the dirt. Other times I found cairns or old blazes on trees, but they were spaced far apart. Eventually, even those disappeared. I kept going, trusting my GPS app. But then the signal flickered. I held up my phone, waited for it to catch back up, and watched as the little blue dot spun. It froze, then jumped sideways. The trail I was on wasn't showing up anymore. I stopped and took off my pack, checked the map again. According to where I thought I was, the cutoff should reconnect with the loop in less than a mile. But the trail was basically gone now, and the ground was sloping downward through thicker trees. I didn't panic. Not yet. I ate a protein bar, drank some water, and decided to keep moving in the same general direction. I figured I could bushwhack until I hit the main loop. That was the mistake. The slope got steeper. The trees started closing in. Then I hit a patch of thick undergrowth, low bushes that scraped at my pants and legs. Every step became harder. The sun dipped lower. I realized I'd gone at least another mile, maybe more, and I hadn't seen anything like a trail. My compass showed I was still heading north-northeast, which should have meant I'd intersect the main loop by now. I stopped again, checked everything. That's when I noticed something off. My right boot was wet, really wet. I looked down and realized I must have stepped into a marshy patch without noticing, and now water had soaked through my sock. I felt the chill spreading up my calf. The temperature was already dropping. I pulled out the map again, this time comparing the topography to where I thought I was. But it didn't make sense. The land was steeper than the map showed. I couldn't hear any water nearby, but there should have been a creek if I was where I thought I was. And then it hit me. I wasn't even close to the cutoff junction. I must have veered off course a while back, probably when the trail faded and I started guessing my direction. Panic started to creep in now. I told myself I just needed to backtrack, go back the way I came. But when I turned around, the terrain behind me looked almost exactly the same. Same trees, same slope, same patches of bushes. No trail, no markers. I picked a direction and walked. After about 20 minutes, I realized I'd only made it harder. I was deeper into the trees. The light was thinning faster now, so I gave up on finding the trail that night. I found a small flat spot near a boulder, cleared away some branches, and set up my tent before it got dark. I had enough food, and my emergency beacon still had a signal. But I didn't want to press that button unless I absolutely had to. Felt like defeat, and part of me still believed I could find the trail the next morning. That night was rough. Cold air seeped through the fabric of the tent. I kept waking up to distant cracks, branches snapping somewhere in the dark. Probably deer, maybe elk, but when you're alone out there, every sound gets twisted into something worse in your head. I woke early. My socks were still damp. My boots squelched when I put it on. I packed quickly and started hiking in what I thought was the right direction. I climbed uphill for better visibility. From the top of a ridge, I scanned the trees and saw nothing, just more forest. By noon, I was low on water. My last refill had been yesterday. I hadn't passed any streams since then. My throat felt dry, my tongue sticking to the roof of my mouth. I moved slower, legs aching. Then I slipped. The hill was steep, covered in pine needles and loose soil. I stepped on a rock that gave way, and suddenly I was sliding. My foot caught something, a root or log, and I went down hard. My shoulder hit first. My face slammed into the dirt. Pain shot through my ribs. I stayed there, curled in the leaves, gasping. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally got up, I checked everything. My arm worked, but barely. Felt like a deep muscle bruise or maybe a strain. I couldn't lift it above my shoulder. My ribs throbbed. My knee was scraped raw and bleeding. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I was too tired. I needed water more than anything. I started following the slope downward, hoping it would lead to a stream. That's how it usually worked in the mountains, follow gravity, and eventually you'll find water. It took another 2 hours, but finally, I heard the sound, faint trickling. I moved toward it and found a small, muddy stream, barely a foot wide. The water was murky, filled with sediment and old leaves. I used my filter anyway and drank until I felt full. That night, I didn't bother with the tent. I was too sore, and the ground was too uneven. I laid out my sleeping pad between 2 trees, pulled my bag over me, and curled up in the dark. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, my arm had stiffened. I couldn't move it at all without shooting pain. I tore a strip from my extra shirt and wrapped it tight, pressing it to my side. I had to keep moving. I kept going downhill, hoping to find a bigger water source or maybe a trail. That's when I heard it. A distant engine. Not loud, but real. Not wind or imagination. An actual mechanical sound. I scrambled in that direction, tripping over roots and branches. I called out, even though I knew no one could hear me. The sound faded. Then I saw it just barely. Through the trees, maybe 200 yards away, there was a thin dirt road. Not a trail. A road. I practically dragged myself toward it, pushing through underbrush until I stumbled out of the woods onto the road, face first into the dirt. It was real. A real road. I laid there for a while, just breathing. Then I stood up, limping, and started walking. About an hour later, a truck came around the bend. A hunter stopped and gave me water, a ride, and eventually, a phone to call for help. Turned out I had wandered almost 6 miles off course from the trail system. The cutoff hadn't been maintained in years and was basically a dead end now. My fall had left me with a torn rotator cuff and cracked rib. I've always liked hiking alone. Some people say it's dangerous. I guess it is, but danger never really stopped me. I don't go off trail, I don't do stupid stuff like climbing cliffs or drinking from streams, and I always carry a first aid kit, a knife, a flashlight, a power bank, a printed map, and enough water. I try to be smart about it. Back in the summer of 2022, I decided to spend 4 days hiking a trail I hadn't done before, the Switchback Trail in central Colorado. It wasn't super popular, which is exactly why I picked it. I wanted quiet. The trail ran for about 30 miles through the San Isabel National Forest, starting near a tiny town and ending at a remote campground I planned to reserve in advance. My plan was simple: hike about 8 to 10 miles a day, take it slow, enjoy the trees, take pictures, and sleep in a hammock I'd tie between trees. I packed enough food for 5 days, just in case, and I left my car near the trailhead in a designated parking lot. I wrote down my hike plan on a printed form, left it under my windshield, and texted my brother before I left, just in case something happened. He lived in Arizona and was used to getting these "I'll text you when I'm back" messages from me. He knew the deal. I started the hike on a Monday morning. The weather was great. Sunny but not too hot, clear skies, no wind. I felt good. The trail was marked well with faded wooden signs every couple of miles, and the elevation gain wasn't too bad. The first day was exactly what I wanted. I hiked maybe 9 miles, set up my hammock near a creek, filtered some water, ate cold beef jerky and trail mix, and watched the sun go down through the pine trees. That night was calm. No sounds but the creek and the occasional bird. I slept well. The second day started fine. It was cooler, which helped. I saw a couple of deer early in the morning and took pictures. The trail began to narrow and twist more. That's probably why they called it the Switchback Trail. There were dozens of tight zigzag turns, especially on the hills. The map showed this part of the trail hugging the side of a ridge. To my left was forest, and to my right, the land sloped steeply down into a deep valley. It was on that second day, around mile 14 or 15, that I first noticed something strange. Not supernatural, not anything like that. Just something off. I was hiking uphill, slow and steady, following the twists. I came around a bend and saw something shiny half buried in the dirt. I stopped, curious. It was a zipper pull, like the kind you'd find on a jacket. It looked new, not rusted, not weathered, just lying there on the edge of the trail. I looked around. No bag, no jacket, no trash. Just the zipper pull by itself. That didn't make sense. If someone had dropped it, wouldn't it be attached to something? I pocketed it and kept going. I wasn't too bothered at that point. Could have been anything. Maybe some camper had a broken zipper and threw it away. The next weird thing came about an hour later. I'd hiked maybe 3 more miles and was getting hungry, so I stopped at a small flat area beside the trail to eat. As I sat down on a rock, I noticed boot prints in the dirt. Not mine, I could see mine going in one direction. These prints were going the opposite way, but they were strange, like too narrow, almost like someone was walking heel to toe in a straight line. Not something you'd normally do on a mountain trail. Who walks like that on uneven ground? I stood up and looked around. No one in sight. The forest was quiet. I didn't feel watched or anything. It just felt still. I finished eating and moved on. My plan was to stop after another 6 miles, right at a small junction marked on the map where a spring crossed the trail. That would give me plenty of water and a good place to hang the hammock. When I got there, I realized something else. The metal signpost that marked the spring junction was bent sideways, like someone had kicked or slammed into it. It looked fresh too. The scratches on the paint were still shiny and silver. Again, not ghostly or mystical, just weird, like someone had been there recently and was angry. I filled my water from the spring, filtered it carefully, and checked the area. I found a few more boot prints near the soft dirt by the stream. Same pattern, heel to toe, very narrow. That night, I didn't sleep well. Something about the area didn't feel right. Maybe it was the prints, or maybe it was just my own imagination. I don't know. I lay in the hammock, wrapped in my sleeping bag, listening to the breeze moving through the trees, but every now and then I jolt awake thinking I heard twigs snapping. Maybe deer, maybe not. The third day was the worst. I woke up early, packed up, and kept going. The trail started to climb again, and the switchbacks got tighter. The trees thinned out, and the valley beside the trail dropped deeper. Felt more exposed up there. The wind picked up, and the sun kept going behind clouds, which made everything look gray and dull. Around mile 20, I saw something that made my stomach twist. A sock, just one, white and filthy, hanging from a low tree branch like someone had tossed it and it got stuck. It didn't look weathered, just dirty. I stared at it for a while and then kept walking. I didn't want to touch it. Maybe half an hour later, I found more. First a strip of red cloth on the ground, then a torn strap like from a backpack. Then this one made me stop cold. A snapped shoelace tied to a branch at shoulder height. Why would someone tie a shoelace to a tree? Not to mark a path, it was too random. I slowed down a lot after that. I kept checking over my shoulder. I didn't hear anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been walking ahead of me, dropping things, leaving signs. By the time I got to where I'd planned to camp that night, I was jumpy, sweating, tired. I didn't want to stay on the trail, so I bushwhacked a short way into the forest, maybe 150 feet off the trail. Far enough to be hidden, but close enough that I wouldn't get lost. I hung my hammock between two trees in a small hollow and tried to eat, but I wasn't hungry. I kept thinking about the sock, the strap, the shoelace. Were they warnings? Was someone hurt? Or worse, was someone playing with me? I barely slept that night. I kept waking up to small sounds. Rustling leaves, snapping branches, wind. Once I thought I saw movement in the trees, just a shape. But when I shined my flashlight, there was nothing. I didn't sleep after that. At first light, I packed everything and got back on the trail. I didn't eat. I just wanted to finish. I figured I had 10 miles left, and I told myself I'd hike it straight, no long breaks. It was colder that morning. The sky looked wrong, too pale. I moved fast, even on the uphill sections. I passed more weird signs. Another sock, this one black, stuffed into a bush, and an empty water bottle cracked and dirty, balanced on a rock like someone had placed it there. That's when I started to feel sure I wasn't alone out there. Not that someone was hiking nearby, not that kind of alone. I started to hear something behind me, soft, regular, like footfalls. I stopped a few times and turned around fast, but every time I did, the trail was empty. The worst moment came around mile 27. I came around a sharp bend and saw something on the ground. At first I thought it was trash, but when I got closer, I saw it was a piece of paper, folded and weighed down with a small rock. I picked it up. It was a photo, printed photo, black and white. It showed a stretch of trail. This trail, I could tell by the trees, by the slope. And in the center of the photo was a person, a hiker. Not clear, grainy, but they looked like me. Same size, same backpack, taken from far away. I dropped the photo and started walking fast. I was scared. I admit it. I stopped caring about finishing the hike the right way. I just wanted out. I pushed harder than I should have. My legs burned. My knees hurt. I barely drank water. Finally, after what felt like forever, I reached the end of the trail. Came out near the campground I had reserved. A few families were there with tents, campfires, kids laughing. I almost cried when I saw them. I forced myself to walk casually across the campground to the check-in board near the ranger station. I didn't tell anyone anything. I just signed my name on the log and went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. I sat in that bathroom stall for half an hour. When I finally came out, I walked back to the gravel road that led from the campground down toward a main road where my brother was supposed to pick me up. He'd be there in an hour. As I waited on the side of the road, legs sore, heart still pounding, I noticed a white SUV pull up near the trailhead I had just exited from. The SUV sat there for a minute. Then it slowly backed up and turned around without anyone getting out. I don't know why, but I felt like that SUV had something to do with everything I saw on the trail. I don't go hiking alone anymore. Not after that. And one more thing. A week later, I checked an online hiking forum for that area. I didn't post anything. I just searched. I found an old thread. dated a year before my hike. A guy had written a post saying he'd hiked the same trail and found weird things: socks, shoelaces, zipper pulls. He ended the post with a single sentence: "Someone's..." I never thought a weekend hike could make me feel that close to death. I've been hiking since I was a teenager. I always found peace in the quiet parts of nature. No city noise, no people, just the sounds of wind through the trees and birds overhead. That's what I was looking for when I planned the hike that weekend. A break, time away from the pressure of daily life. I live in northern Washington, close to the Cascades. There are trails all over, and many of them are barely touched, especially the lesser-known ones. I had done all the popular hikes, the kind with signs every mile and other hikers always in sight. I wanted something different this time, something harder, longer, and quieter. So I started reading forums online, looking for a trail that wasn't heavily used but still reachable. One name kept popping up in a few posts: Copper Ridge, but with an extension through an unmaintained side trail that led toward old, forgotten fire lookout routes. There wasn't much information, just mentions of steep climbs, thick woods, and no service. It sounded perfect. I packed my gear carefully. I didn't want to overpack because I planned to be fast, but I also didn't want to risk being underprepared. I took a small tent, a sleeping bag, basic food, water filter, bear spray, map, compass, GPS watch, and first aid. I always hiked alone. It was just easier that way. No one to wait on, no one to argue with, and I could move at my own pace. I left early Friday morning and drove to the trailhead. There was only one other car in the small gravel lot. I noted the license plate just in case. It's a habit I got into for safety. I signed the trail register and started walking. The first few miles were familiar. I'd done this part before on a day hike a year ago. Well-marked, steady incline, wide views of the peaks around me. But by mid-afternoon, I reached the turnoff where the trail narrowed and dipped into dense trees. That's where the real hike began. As soon as I stepped into the trees, the world went quiet. The thick branches above cut out the sun, and everything felt darker. The trail was less clear now, still visible but covered in fallen leaves and broken branches. I moved slower, scanning the ground often. I didn't want to twist an ankle or get turned around. I had the GPS watch on, but in deep woods like that, signals get spotty fast. I pushed forward for another 2 hours before stopping. I found a small clearing near a slope, flat enough to pitch my tent. I didn't see or hear anyone since the start of the hike, which was fine with me. I made a small cold meal, filtered some water from a stream nearby, and crawled into the tent as the sky darkened. That first night was quiet, almost too quiet. I'm used to night noises: wind, bugs, the occasional rustle of small animals. But here it felt like everything stopped moving once the sun went down. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a single cracking sound, like a branch snapping under pressure. Then nothing. I lay still for a long time, holding my breath, but it didn't happen again. The next morning, I broke camp early and kept going. The trail was rougher now. Trees had fallen across the path in places. Sometimes I had to climb over logs or detour around thick undergrowth. The air was damp, and there was a smell I couldn't place, like wet moss mixed with something sour. I figured it was just a patch of bad soil or maybe a dead animal nearby. About 3 hours in, I reached a fork. It wasn't marked on my map. One side led upward along a ridge, and the other dropped steeply toward a gully. I checked my compass and guessed the ridge was the right way. The lower path looked like it hadn't been used in years, covered in vines and almost invisible. I took the ridge. That climb was harder than I expected. Loose rocks, narrow edges, and nowhere to rest. Every step took effort, and sweat ran down my back even in the cold air. I stopped halfway to catch my breath and looked down. That's when I noticed something strange. About 200 feet below, on the overgrown lower path, there were signs of movement. Trees were shaking slightly, like someone or something was passing through. I watched for a minute but saw nothing. I figured it could have been an animal, maybe a bear, but it moved with too much direction. It wasn't random. I kept moving. My legs were starting to ache, but I didn't want to camp on the slope. I needed flat ground. Eventually, I reached a shelf with enough space to rest. I dropped my pack and sat down. The sun was starting to lower again. I checked the GPS. It had lost signal. I wasn't surprised. I set up my tent again and ate quickly. I didn't feel hungry, but I forced food down. I knew I needed the energy. That night, I didn't sleep well. Around 2 a.m., I heard something again. More than one branch snapping this time. Several. Then footsteps, soft but steady. It sounded like someone was walking just outside my tent. Not fast, not loud, but close. I didn't move. I lay frozen, heart pounding. I kept thinking I imagined it, but it went on for almost 5 minutes. Then silence. I stayed still for another hour before I finally drifted off, more from exhaustion than comfort. By morning, nothing looked disturbed. No tracks, no torn gear, nothing missing. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I packed up quickly and got moving. My legs were sore now. The cold air bit at my skin. I kept checking behind me every few minutes. I didn't see anything, but I felt watched. By midday, I reached a small open space. I stopped to refill water at a stream and eat. While I was digging in my pack, I heard movement again. Closer this time. I turned fast and caught a flash of movement in the trees. It was quick, too quick to see clearly, but tall. Not an animal. A person, maybe, but if it was, they weren't making any effort to be seen. I called out instinctively, then realized I broke my own rule. I never make noise on a solo hike unless absolutely necessary. Nothing answered, of course. The trees stayed still. I kept eating, trying to act normal, but I felt my nerves rising. I cut the break short and pushed forward. The trail was worse now, if you could even call it a trail. It was more like suggestions of one. I was pushing through thick underbrush, and everything started to look the same. I checked my compass again and realized I had veered off the expected path. The GPS watch still had no signal. I marked my spot mentally and tried to backtrack. That's when I found the old fire lookout. It wasn't marked on any maps I had, but there it was, a rotted, crumbling wooden structure set slightly off the ridgeline. It looked abandoned for decades. Part of the roof was gone, and one side had caved in. But it was shelter and I was tired. I stepped inside carefully. The floor groaned under my boots. The place smelled of mildew and age. There was an old rusted stove in the corner, a table covered in moss, and part of a wooden chair. I dropped my pack and decided to stay there for the night. It felt safer than sleeping out in the open. I didn't sleep at all. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again, outside the lookout. Slow, crunching, not an animal, not random. I grabbed the bear spray and sat up straight. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't make a sound. Then something touched the wall. A single tap, then again, like fingers. I stayed perfectly still. It went on for over 10 minutes, soft taps on the wall. I didn't breathe. Then it stopped. The rest of the night passed in silence. But I didn't close my eyes. Not once. When morning came, I packed up and left fast. I didn't even eat. I needed to get back to the main trail. I was tired, hungry, and tense. I started moving downhill, figuring it would lead me to a stream or a sign of the old trail. I moved fast, almost recklessly. My legs were shaking, and my boots slid on damp leaves. After an hour, I slipped and fell hard, scraping my arm on a sharp rock. I stood up slowly, bleeding, and checked my compass again. Still pointed south. That was the direction of the car. I had to keep going. Eventually, I found signs of the trail again. Faded boot prints, flattened grass. I followed it, heart pounding, eyes scanning the trees constantly. Then I saw it again, movement ahead. Person. At least it looked like one. About 100 feet away, standing half behind a tree. Not moving. I froze. My hands started shaking. I didn't call out this time. I just stared. Then it turned and walked slowly into the trees. That was it. I snapped. I turned around and ran. Full sprint. I didn't care about noise anymore. I needed to get out. I kept running downhill, lungs burning, until I saw a familiar rock formation. I had passed it 2 days ago. I was back near the main trail, I didn't stop. I followed the trail as fast as I could, checking over my shoulder every few minutes. I never saw the person again, or whatever it was. By the time I saw my car, I was crying from the stress, shaking so badly I could barely open the door. I drove straight. It started off as a regular weekend hike. I had done dozens of solo hikes before. I liked the quiet, the feeling of being away from everything. No phone signal, no noise, no people. Just the sound of the trail under my boots and the wind in the trees. That's all I ever wanted. That was what helped me reset when everything back in the city got too loud. The plan was to do a 2-day loop in the northern part of the range, somewhere remote and not popular. I had found it in a forum post from years ago. A guy mentioned an old trail that hadn't been maintained but was still passable if you knew what you were doing. It connected 2 more popular trails by crossing through a deep valley. He said it was overgrown in parts but quiet, and you could still follow the old blazes if you kept your eyes open. That sounded perfect to me. I drove out early that Saturday, parked my car at a turnout just off the main road, and started hiking with a light pack, tent, food, water filter, and the basics. I was careful about supplies. I always was. I marked the route on my GPS and even brought paper maps in a waterproof bag. It was August, so the days were long, and the forecast was clear. The first part of the trail was great. Well-used, easy elevation. I saw a few people in the morning, mostly heading back the other way. After around 6 miles, I reached the point where I was supposed to take the connector, the old, barely used trail that dipped down into the valley. There wasn't a sign, just an old marker on a tree, faded white paint. The path was narrow and partly blocked by branches. It looked like no one had been down it in years, but I checked my map, confirmed the turn, and kept going. Within 20 minutes, the trail got harder to follow. The brush closed in, felt more like bushwhacking than hiking. I kept having to stop and move branches, double-check where I was, look for the old blazes. I started sweating more than usual, not from fear, just from effort. I figured once I got through the valley and up the other side, it would get easier. I was wrong. After a couple hours, I realized I was going slower than I expected. The valley was deeper, and the slope down was full of loose rock. I slipped a few times but managed to stay upright. By the time I got to the bottom, the sun had moved behind the ridge, and everything felt darker. Not nighttime dark, just shadowed, colder. I stopped to eat a protein bar, checked my GPS again, and realized I was maybe 4 miles behind schedule. I considered turning back, but the idea of climbing back up that slope felt worse than pushing forward. So I kept going. That's when I started hearing it. The silence. It's hard to explain. There wasn't a sound, no wind, no birds, no water. Nothing. Just the soft crunch of my boots and my breathing. Felt thick, like the woods were holding their breath. I tried to shake the feeling, but it got stronger as I walked. The trail kept narrowing until it was just a game trail, barely there. My GPS showed I was on the right line, but there were no more markers, just woods. I passed a fallen tree and had to climb over it. My pants tore on a branch, and I felt the cold air on my shin. A shallow cut. I wiped the blood with a tissue and kept walking. After another hour, I knew something was wrong. The path was gone. Not just overgrown, gone. It just faded into the underbrush. I stopped and tried to look around for any signs, any paint on the trees, any old footprints. Nothing, just thick green silence. I pulled out my map and compass. According to the terrain lines, I was still in the valley, maybe a mile from where the trail was supposed to climb up the other side. So I picked a line, kept the compass steady, and started walking. That's when the forest changed. The trees got thicker, older. I started seeing moss everywhere, on rocks, logs, even hanging from branches. Felt colder, too. I zipped up my jacket. My boots squished through wet leaves and mud. At one point, I stepped into water that went over my ankles. I hadn't seen a creek marked, but there it was, dark, slow-moving, maybe 10 feet across. There was no bridge, just slippery rocks. I thought about turning back again, but I kept going. I crossed carefully, soaked one boot, and nearly fell in. On the other side, I climbed up a small bank and realized my GPS wasn't working. No signal, no satellite lock. I held it up, moved around, waited, but it just spun. That was the first time I really felt panic rise. I tried to breathe through it. I told myself I had maps, I had gear, I had food and water. I wasn't lost. Not really. I just needed to keep moving and get up the other side of the valley. So I kept walking. But the woods didn't want me to. The terrain got worse. Fallen logs, thick brush, steep slopes. I had to crawl in parts using my hands. Everything was damp and slippery. My clothes were soaked with sweat and creek water. My leg hurt from the cut earlier. I checked the time and realized the sun was getting low. Light was already filtering through the trees at an angle. I needed to find a place to set up camp. There wasn't one. Every patch of ground was uneven, muddy, or filled with roots. I walked for another 30 minutes, hoping to find a flat spot, anything clear. I found a small rise above the valley floor, just big enough for my tent if I cleared the rocks. It wasn't ideal, but it would work. I pitched the tent quickly, pulled out my sleeping pad and bag, and changed into dry socks. I made myself eat, even though I wasn't hungry. I filtered some water from the creek and drank until my stomach hurt. Then I sat there listening. Still no birds, no wind, no bugs, just the sound of water far behind me. That night was long. I tried to sleep, but I kept waking up. Every sound made me freeze. Branches cracking, something brushing against the tent. Once, I heard a deep thud, like something heavy hitting the ground not far away. I didn't move. I just lay there, holding my breath, staring at the roof of the tent. Nothing happened, but I didn't sleep again. When the light started to change, I got up. I packed fast, didn't eat, didn't care. I just wanted out, but I didn't know where out was anymore. I tried to use the GPS again. Still no lock, just a spinning arrow. I took out the compass and started moving uphill, following the general direction I thought the trail was supposed to continue. It was hard, steep. Every step took effort. I slipped and slid. My legs were sore. My knee ached. My shin throbbed. I kept looking for signs of trail, but saw nothing. Just trees. And more trees. By noon, I realized I was completely turned around. I had been climbing for hours, but I hadn't reached a ridge. The woods didn't change. No clearer skies, just the same thick canopy above. I stopped and forced myself to calm down. I sat on a log, drank some water, and looked at the map again. But it didn't help. Without knowing exactly where I was, the map was just paper. That's when I made the worst decision. Instead of staying put and waiting, I kept moving. I don't know how long I walked. Hours, maybe. The trees started to change again. More pine, drier ground. That gave me hope. Maybe I was getting closer to the ridge. I kept climbing, stepping over dead branches, slipping on pine needles. Then the ground gave out. Just like that. One step forward and it was gone. I slid down a slope, fast. My arms flailed, grabbing at roots. I bounced off something hard. Pain exploded in my shoulder. I crashed into a pile of dead leaves at the bottom, gasping. Took me a few minutes to move. Everything hurt. My shoulder felt wrong. My leg was bleeding again. My ribs ached, but I was alive. I checked my bag. The gear was still there, though some of it had shifted. One strap was broken. I tried to stand, but my left ankle screamed in pain. I collapsed back to the ground, breathing hard. I didn't say anything, just sat there listening. Silence. I pulled my leg toward me and looked at the ankle. Swollen, already turning red. I could move my toes, but not well. I wrapped it tight with a bandage and tried to stand again. This time I stayed up, barely. I used a long stick as a crutch and started limping forward, every step like fire through my leg. I didn't know where I was going anymore. I just didn't want to sit there and wait. That night, I didn't set up the tent. I just lay under the trees, wrapped in my sleeping bag, shivering. I heard something moving in the trees that night. Big, heavy. It didn't sound like a deer. It moved slowly, circled once, then again. I didn't breathe. Then it was gone. In the morning, I forced myself to stand again. My ankle was worse. I couldn't put weight on it anymore. I used both my trekking poles as makeshift crutches and dragged myself forward, half hopping, half crawling. Then, around midday, I heard it. A sound. A real sound. A distant engine. I froze, turned my head, listened. It was faint but real. I changed direction, heading toward it. Crawled when I... It was early October when I decided to hike the Ridge Trail in northern Montana. I'd taken time off from work, my head full of stress, and I needed something away from screens, noise, and people. The Ridge Trail had been on my list for years. Remote, tough, and not too crowded. It seemed like the perfect place to clear my mind and get some fresh air. I packed light but smart sleeping bag, tent, freeze-dried meals, a small propane stove, water filtration gear, layers of clothing, a good knife, bear spray, first aid kit, and enough food for 5 days. I had no cell signal out there. I liked that part. I left my car at a gravel turnout near the start of the trail, locked it, and began walking around 9 a.m. on a Thursday. The air was crisp and dry. It had rained 2 nights earlier, so the ground was a little soft, but otherwise the weather was perfect. Cool in the shade, warm in the sun. The forest was mostly pine, but there were stretches of aspen glowing gold in the fall light. Everything smelled clean. I felt good. The Ridge Trail started off fairly flat for the first few miles, then it slowly began to climb. I passed a few old signs, faded paint, some rust, but they pointed the way. The trail wasn't totally overgrown, but it didn't look well used either. I saw no one all morning, just birds, squirrels, and the occasional set of deer tracks in the mud. Around mile 7, the trail started to rise more steeply. There were long switchbacks, thick trees on either side, and not much of a view. It was hard work, but I didn't mind. I liked the burn in my legs. It shuts off the noisy part of my brain. That first night, I camped near a stream just off the trail. I found a decent flat spot in a little clearing surrounded by trees. I filtered water, made a small meal of rice and beans, and ate quietly with my back against a log. I heard elk bugling in the distance. It was peaceful. I set up my tent, crawled in, and zipped up for the night. I didn't fall asleep right away, but eventually, I dozed off. Sometime around midnight, I woke up to the sound of a branch snapping nearby. I lay still, heart racing. Then I heard a shuffle, something moving slowly, not far from the tent. I reached quietly for my bear spray. I didn't turn on my light. I just waited, breathing as softly as I could. Whatever it was walked a slow circle around my tent and then moved off. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I checked the area. I didn't see any obvious tracks, but the ground was hard and covered in needles. Could have been a deer, could have been a bear. I packed up, ate a cold bar, and got moving. The second day was more intense. The trail climbed fast, and the trees started to thin out. There were long stretches of rocky ground where I had to watch my footing. I took short breaks often, drinking water and resting my legs. I hadn't seen anyone since I started. No voices, no campsites, not even litter. It was quiet in a way that made me feel like I'd left the world behind. That evening, I found a ridge with an incredible view. I could see down into a wide valley, untouched forest as far as the eye could see. I set up camp on a flattish spot behind a cluster of big rocks that blocked the wind. I cooked pasta and watched the sun dip low, turning the clouds orange and pink. That night, I slept better, though I still woke up once around 3 a.m. It was dead silent outside. The next morning, I kept going. I was roughly halfway through the trail now. I planned to loop back around in 2 more days, rejoin the starting point, and head home. Around midday, I crossed an old wooden bridge over a narrow stream. The bridge was rotting in places, and I stepped carefully. On the other side, I followed the trail as it curved steeply up along a cliffside. The drop-off was sharp. One wrong step would be a fall of at least 100 feet. That's when I noticed something weird. There were tracks on the trail ahead of me where the dirt was soft. At first I thought they were deer, but the stride was too long and narrow. Then I thought maybe a person. Boots, maybe, but they were spaced strange. Deep heel marks, no clear tread, and almost no toe prints, like someone had been dragging their feet in a straight line. They headed up the trail same way I was going. I stopped and stared at them for a while. Something about them felt off, but I kept moving. I figured maybe someone had passed through earlier in the week and the prints had held up. Still, I didn't like the look of them. That night, I camped near a small alpine lake. I fished a little with some line I'd brought, caught a small trout, and cooked it in foil. It was a good meal, and for a moment I forgot about the weird tracks. But around dusk, I heard something again. Movement on the far side of the lake. I froze. It wasn't an animal crashing through the brush. It was more like someone walking slowly. No voices, no lights, just a shape too far to make out moving behind the trees. I decided not to stay exposed. I packed up and moved deeper into the woods, finding a new spot well off the trail, surrounded by dense undergrowth. I didn't make a fire. I ate a cold meal and lay low. I didn't sleep much that night either. I kept hearing twigs breaking, just once or twice an hour, like someone testing the edge of where I could hear. By the next morning, I'd made up my mind to get off the trail early. I still had 2 days of hiking left, but I didn't feel safe anymore. I couldn't explain it, but my gut told me to go. I packed quickly and started walking as soon as there was enough light. I checked behind me often. I kept bear spray in my hand. My nerves were shot. That afternoon, while descending a steep section of trail covered in loose rock, I slipped and landed hard on my right ankle. I heard a crunch and felt a burst of pain shoot up my leg. I rolled over and grabbed it. It wasn't broken, but it was bad. I couldn't put weight on it. I lay there for a few minutes, sweat pouring down my face, trying to breathe through the pain. Eventually, I managed to get upright. I cut a thick branch to use as a crutch and hobbled slowly down the trail. My pace was cut in half. Every step sent pain through my leg. I knew I was in trouble. I had about 15 miles left to reach my car. No cell signal, no one around. That night, I found a small overhang near the base of a hill and made camp. I wrapped my ankle tight, took 2 painkillers, and ate jerky and dried fruit. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't sleep at all. Something was out there. I heard it again and again, snapping twigs, the slow drag of movement. Not an animal. I know how animals sound in the dark. This was something else. Someone walking carefully, quietly. I lay there clutching the bear spray, my knife in my other hand, and waited. Around 2 a.m., I heard breathing, just outside the overhang. Heavy, slow, deliberate breathing. It lasted less than a minute. Then it was gone. I didn't move until daylight. I got up, packed fast, and started walking. I barely made a mile an hour. I kept checking behind me. Around noon, I found a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch beside the trail. It wasn't mine. It looked like denim, faded and shredded, like it had been there a while, but not long enough to be bleached by sun or rain. I kept moving. Late that afternoon, I saw a shape ahead on the trail. I stopped and crouched behind a tree, heart hammering. It looked like a person, tall, thin, standing still. I couldn't make out details, just the outline. I stayed hidden for almost 10 minutes. When I finally looked again, the shape was gone. That evening, I couldn't find a good place to camp. My ankle was swollen, and I was exhausted. I found a flat area next to a dry creek bed and set up there. I didn't eat much, just water and a protein bar. I was too anxious to eat. I wrapped my ankle again and lay down in my tent, fully clothed, knife and spray beside me. That night was the worst. Around midnight, I heard footsteps approach slowly. Then I heard something brushing the side of my tent. Not an animal sniffing, something brushing against the fabric, like fingers. I held my breath. The tent shifted slightly, like it was being pushed from one side. Then silence. I lay there for hours, frozen. No footsteps walking away. No sound. Just silence. In the morning, I unzipped the tent slowly and peeked outside. Nothing. Just woods and dirt. I packed up and kept moving. By early afternoon, I saw the start of the final switchbacks that would take me down to the gravel road near my car. I was limping hard, barely making progress. I paused to drink water and rest. When I looked down at my bottle, I noticed something in the dirt. Another footprint. The same weird dragging shape I'd seen 2 days ago, but this one was fresh, still damp, like the dirt had been stepped on just an hour before. I didn't stop after that. I forced myself to move faster, gritting through the pain. I stumbled and fell several times, but I got up each time. The woods were closing in around me. I kept hearing faint sounds, twigs snapping, distant movement, but I didn't look back. It started out as a simple solo hiking trip. I had taken dozens of them before, and nothing ever went wrong. I picked a lesser-known trail in central Idaho, one I found on an old hiking forum. The guy who posted it said it wasn't maintained anymore, but it used to be a Forest Service trail. He mentioned a few old cabins, animal tracks, and great views. That was all I needed to hear. I packed my usual gear: a heavy-duty pack, sleeping bag, tent, cooking gear, a map printed from an old site, GPS, plenty of food and water, bear spray, knife, and a sidearm just in case. I told one friend where I was going and when I expected to be back. Standard procedure. I left early morning and drove a few hours out until I reached the rough gravel road that led to the old trailhead. By noon, I was already a couple miles in. The trail was overgrown, but I could still make it out. Fallen logs blocked parts of the path, and the forest was thicker than I expected. But it was beautiful. Towering pines, thick moss on the rocks, streams that cut across the trail in quiet trickles. I felt completely alone out there, and I liked that. I passed an old wooden sign barely standing anymore. The letters were faded and cracked, but I made out part of the name, Hickory Ridge. That matched the forum post. I kept hiking uphill, following the faint trail through brush and trees. By the time I reached a decent flat area, it was late afternoon. I set up camp next to a small stream and started boiling water. I ate quickly, cleaned up, and sat back against a log, listening to the breeze moving through the trees. That night, I slept light. The forest had its own sounds, and some were louder than I liked. Branches cracking, distant rustling, a few owl calls. I kept my sidearm nearby just in case. The next morning, I packed up and kept going. According to the map and GPS, the trail looped around a large ridge before circling back down to the other side. My plan was to hike the full loop in 3 days, camp in 2 different spots, and then head back. That second day is when things started to feel wrong. About 2 hours in, I found the first weird thing. There was an old boot on the side of the trail, cracked and filled with dirt. It wasn't modern. Looked like a leather hiking boot from maybe the 70s or 80s. I picked it up, turned it over. No foot inside, thank God. But the laces were missing, and something about it made me uneasy. I left it there and kept going. The trail was harder to follow that day. The undergrowth was thicker. I had to push through thorns and duck under low branches. My legs were getting scratched up, and the sun was covered by clouds most of the time. I kept checking the GPS, and I was still on the right path, but it didn't feel right. It felt like the forest didn't want me there. Around mid-afternoon, I found the first cabin. Just like the post said, it was half collapsed, the roof caved in, walls leaning like they were about to fall. I checked it out briefly. Nothing inside except rotting wood, old metal cans, and broken glass. I took a couple pictures and kept walking. That's when I noticed the silence. No birds, no wind, no insects, just silence. Felt like something was watching me, but I didn't see anything. I stood still for a few minutes, scanning the trees. I didn't move until I heard something crunch in the distance, like a footstep on dry leaves. I drew my sidearm and waited. Nothing else happened. No more sounds. I backed up and kept walking. I moved faster after that. My plan was to make it to the other side of the ridge and set up camp, but I started feeling like I didn't want to sleep out here again. I checked the map and realized if I pushed hard, I could make it down the southern trail and get close to the original trailhead. I decided to do that. The terrain got worse. The trail disappeared completely in some spots, and I had to rely on GPS and compass. I slipped a couple times on loose rocks and mud. Once, I fell hard enough to scrape my arm and bruise my hip. I I kept going. Around 6 p.m., I was exhausted. I hadn't seen anyone or any signs of animals for hours. I came across a second cabin. This one was in better shape. The door was gone, but the walls and roof were still standing. It was made of logs and had an old stove in the corner, a metal-framed bed with broken springs, and a wooden chair that looked handmade. Something about it gave me the creeps. The stove had soot around it like someone used it recently, but there was dust on everything else. I didn't stay long. I kept hiking downhill, hoping to find a clearing big enough to set up camp. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. I saw a figure standing about 50 yards off trail. At first I thought it was a tree stump, but it moved. I froze. It was a person, I think, wearing something dark, maybe a jacket or cloak. I couldn't make out the face. It was just standing there, not walking, not hiding, just watching. I shouted out, but nothing came back. I waved. Nothing. I blinked, and when I looked again, they were gone. I don't remember running, but I must have. The next thing I knew, I was way off trail, my GPS blinking low battery. I had lost the path completely. I had to backtrack slowly and carefully, relying on compass and the map to find the old trail. The light was fading fast. I finally found a narrow spot between two boulders and set up camp in a panic. I didn't eat much. I didn't light a fire. I just sat with my back to the rock wall, knife in hand, sidearm close. That night was the worst. I didn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Something was moving out there. I could hear footsteps now and then. Sometimes twigs would snap. I never saw anything, but I kept my headlamp off and just waited. Hours passed. My back ached. My eyes were dry. Then something brushed the tent. Not wind, not rain. Something touched it. I held my breath and aimed my sidearm at the flap. I didn't move for over an hour. Eventually, the sounds faded. I must have dozed off around dawn. When I woke up, it was light out, and the forest seemed normal again. Birds chirping, sunlight filtering through the trees. I packed fast and hiked without stopping. My body was sore. I had no appetite. I followed the GPS as long as I could, until it died. Then I used my compass and memory. Around noon, I found the trail again, and not long after that, I found my car. I almost cried. I drove straight back to town. Didn't stop. Didn't eat. Just drove. When I got home, I deleted the photos of the cabins. I deleted the GPS trail. I tossed the printed map. I didn't want to look at any of it again. A week later, I looked up the forum post again. The original thread was gone. User deleted. No archive. Nothing. I haven't hiked alone since then. Whatever was out there wasn't a ghost, and it wasn't some legend. It was real. Person. Maybe someone who lived out there. Maybe something worse. I still think about that moment when I saw the figure standing there, completely still. It wasn't afraid of me, and it didn't want me to leave. It was the third week of October, and I had taken a week off from work just to get away from everything. No phones, no emails, no city noise, and especially no people. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. I needed a break, and I didn't want anyone trying to talk me out of it. I chose the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana. It was far enough from home to feel like a real escape, but not so far that I couldn't drive there in a day. I'd been hiking before, but this trip was going to be the longest solo hike I had ever done. I had packed for 5 days. That included food, a lightweight tent, a decent sleeping bag, 2 portable water filters, a small pot, my hiking stove, first aid kit, rain gear, and some tools just in case, things like a knife, cord, and a fire starter. I had everything laid out neatly in my backpack. The plan was simple. Start at the main trailhead near Lake Como, follow the Blodgett Canyon Trail for a couple days, then take a side route that looped back around to the car. It wasn't an official loop trail, but I had studied the topographic maps enough times to know the terrain and the alternate routes. I had a printed map and compass. I knew better than to trust GPS up there. I started out on a Monday morning, just as the sun came up. It was cold, probably in the high 30s. I wore my thermal base layer and a fleece pullover under my jacket. There was a layer of frost on the ground, but the sky was clear. The first few miles were easy. Tall pines lined both sides of the trail, and golden leaves covered the ground like a blanket. I didn't see a single person all morning, which made me feel even better about the trip. I wasn't looking for peace. I was looking for total silence. By the afternoon of the second day, I had made it about 17 miles in. I had passed a couple small creeks and had filled up my bottles. I set up camp in a flat clearing a few hundred feet above a narrow river. I sat and watched the sun dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the valley. That night, I heard elk bugling in the distance. I wasn't worried. I had no food in the tent. Everything was hung in a bear bag, about 50 yards from camp, the way it's supposed to be. The third morning was colder. There was frost on the inside of my tent. I boiled some water for oatmeal and coffee and packed up quickly. This was supposed to be the day I turned onto that side route that looped back toward the trailhead. It wasn't marked, just a faint path that split off from the main trail and went east through a dense patch of forest. I almost missed it, but I caught the turn just in time. Once I left the main trail, the whole mood changed. The forest got darker, the trees were closer together, and the wind felt colder even though the sun was out. The trail was narrow and sometimes hard to follow. Fallen trees blocked the path in places, and I had to climb over or go around them. It felt like no one had walked this way in years. That didn't bother me at first. I had expected it. I wanted to be alone. Around noon, I stopped to rest on a large rock. I pulled out some trail mix and a protein bar and sat for a while, just listening to the wind. That's when I realized how quiet it was. Too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, just wind and the occasional creaking of trees. I felt a strange tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. It wasn't fear exactly, just pressure. I kept going. The next few hours were tough. The trail was overgrown, and in some spots it disappeared completely. I used the map to keep my direction, mostly heading east and slightly north. I figured I'd eventually hit a wide ridge that would lead me down toward an old logging road I had seen on the map. That road would lead me back to the trailhead, but the ridge never came. By 3 p.m., I knew I was off course. I wasn't completely lost, not yet, but the terrain wasn't matching the map anymore. I tried climbing a rocky slope to get a better view, hoping to spot a landmark. When I got to the top, all I saw was forest, thick, dark forest in every direction. No ridges, no trails, just endless trees. That tight feeling in my chest came back, stronger this time. I didn't panic, though. I told myself I still had time to fix this. I decided to head downhill, figuring I'd eventually run into water. If I followed a stream, it would probably lead to something man-made eventually. I started hiking downhill, not even bothering with the overgrown path anymore. I checked the compass every 20 minutes. I stopped every hour to drink water and rest my legs. The sun started to dip lower and lower, and shadows grew long. I set up camp just before dark on a flat patch of mossy ground near some rocks. I didn't eat much that night. My stomach felt tight. That was the first night I heard the snapping. It started just after I lay down in my sleeping bag. A sharp crack, like a branch breaking. Not close, but not far either. Then another one. Then silence. I froze. It wasn't an animal sound. It wasn't the wind. It sounded like something stepping on sticks. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. Then a third snap, louder and closer. I grabbed the knife I kept near my pillow and lay there, barely breathing. Minutes passed. No more snaps. No footsteps. No movement. I didn't sleep much. The next day, I moved fast. I didn't stop to eat. I just packed up and started walking. I followed the slope downward again, looking for water, for any kind of break in the trees. I finally found a narrow stream late that morning, just wide enough to fill a bottle. I followed it downstream, stepping on rocks and logs, slipping more than once. At one point, I thought I saw something ahead in the trees. Not a person, just a dark shape. It was gone before I could focus on it. I told myself it was a tree or a shadow. I kept walking. The trees got thicker. The stream dropped into a narrow gorge, and I had to backtrack to find another way down. I was getting tired. My legs ached. My back hurt. My hands were scraped from catching myself on rocks. I set up camp again that evening, this time in a small hollow beneath some large boulders. I cooked a hot meal even though I didn't feel like eating. I needed something warm in my stomach. That night, I hung my food higher and further from camp than before. Just before falling asleep, I heard a sound again, but this time it wasn't snapping. It was breathing, heavy, slow breathing just outside the tent. I didn't move. My heart was pounding so loud I thought whatever was out there could hear it. I gripped my knife and waited. The breathing lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I didn't sleep. When morning finally came, I packed in under 5 minutes and moved fast. I followed the stream again, stepping hard through the brush, not caring if I made noise. I needed to get out of there. That afternoon, the stream finally led to something, a gravel road. Not a real road, more like a path used by trucks a long time ago. But it was wide and I could follow it. I was shaking. My throat was dry. I almost cried, but I was too tired. I followed that road for hours, stumbling, slipping, even falling once and scraping my knee. I didn't care. I kept walking. It was nearly dark when I saw the cabin. It was small, broken down, probably abandoned. No glass in the windows. The door was hanging by one hinge, but the roof was still intact. I went inside, looked around. It was empty except for an old metal bed frame and a broken chair. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and just breathed. I didn't feel safe exactly, but it was shelter. I didn't start a fire. I didn't eat. I just sat there in the dark. That night, I heard footsteps again. They didn't stop at the cabin. They walked slowly around it. One time, then again, and again. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. In the early morning hours, they stopped. When the sun rose, I opened the door and ran. I followed the road for what felt like forever. Around noon, I heard something, an engine. I ran toward the sound, waving my arms. A red pickup came around the bend. A hunter. He stopped, looked at me like I was a ghost. He drove me back to the ranger station. I didn't talk much. I didn't explain everything. Just said I got turned around. I haven't been back to the mountains since. I still don't know what was out there. Probably a person. Maybe a squatter. Maybe something worse. All I know is I was watched, and I wasn't alone. I've done a lot of solo hiking in my life. Most of it has been peaceful. Quiet trails through pine forests, long switchbacks along rocky ridges, peaceful nights under open skies. But the one I'm about to talk about, it was different. I still think about it often, even now. I should have turned back. I know that. But once you get far enough in, it's hard to know whether going forward is worse than going back. It started on a Tuesday morning in late September. I'd planned a solo hike through a remote stretch of forest land in the Idaho Panhandle. I'd done hikes nearby before, but never this far in. The route I picked was a mix of old Forest Service roads and narrow game trails, and I'd found the path marked on an old topographic map that some guy had posted online. It wasn't an official trail, which should have been my first red flag, but I figured I'd be careful. I had my GPS, compass, map printout, and backup batteries. I had food, water, and shelter packed in tight. I was used to roughing it. The plan was simple. Hike in for 2 days, camp 2 nights, then hike back the same way. I parked my car in a gravel turnout next to a logging road, locked it, threw on my pack, and started moving. The air was cool but not cold, maybe mid-50s. Pine needles crunched under my boots, and the forest was quiet except for a few birds and the occasional squirrel. Felt normal at first. About 3 hours in, the trail got rougher. I found myself crossing fallen trees and ducking under low branches. A few times, I had to double-check my map to make sure I was still heading the right way. The GPS had a strong signal, though, and my compass readings were holding steady. Around mid-afternoon, I stopped at a small clearing near a stream to eat lunch. The water was icy cold, and I filled one of my bottles from it after filtering it through my squeeze filter. I sat on a flat rock and ate jerky, trail mix, and a granola bar. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Something about the area felt off. Couldn't place it. There were no birds, no wind. Even the water in the stream made less noise than it should have. I told myself it was just in my head and kept going. As the sun dropped lower, the light changed fast. It went from soft golden to dull gray in what felt like minutes. I found a place to set up camp, a small flat patch between two thick pine trees. I pitched my tent, hung my food bag high in a tree away from camp, and ate a cold dinner while watching the shadows stretch across the forest floor. That night, I didn't sleep well. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of something moving outside the tent. It wasn't loud, just a soft crack of a twig. Then silence. Then another soft sound, like footsteps but spaced too far apart to be a rabbit or a raccoon. I stayed still. My bear spray was next to me, within reach. I listened for a while, but after a few minutes, the sound stopped. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I stepped outside and checked the area. No tracks, nothing out of place. Still, I packed up quickly and hit the trail again. I tried to brush off the feeling of being watched, but it stuck with me. The second day was harder. The trail became less of a trail and more of a suggestion. I had to bushwhack through undergrowth in places, using my compass more often. By midday, I found myself in a part of the forest that felt untouched. No trash, no signs of campers, no marks of logging. It was dense, damp, and full of ferns, moss, and deadfall. I had a moment where I almost turned around. Something about the quiet felt different here. It wasn't peaceful. It was like the woods were holding their breath. But I pushed on. I wanted to make it to a spot marked on my map, an old fire lookout tower at the edge of a ridgeline. It was supposed to be abandoned decades ago, and I figured it would be a cool place to rest and maybe take a few photos. By late afternoon, I reached the tower. It was in worse shape than I'd expected. The wood was rotting, the stairs leading up were mostly broken, and the structure leaned slightly to one side. I didn't dare go up, but I set up camp nearby, a few hundred feet down the hill. That night was worse than the last. Just after dark, I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. It was a long, low groan. Not human, not an animal I could identify. It echoed from somewhere up the ridge, maybe near the tower. I froze, holding my breath, waiting for it to happen again. It did, 3 more times, each one softer than the last. Then silence. I didn't sleep at all. I kept my flashlight in my hand and my bear spray in the other. I thought about leaving right then, hiking in the dark, but the trail was rough and hard to follow even in daylight. I stayed in the tent, heart pounding, ears straining for every sound. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was heading back, and I wasn't wasting time. I packed everything quickly and started down the way I'd come. My legs were stiff and my mind foggy from lack of sleep, but adrenaline pushed me forward. Less than 2 hours in, I realized something was wrong. I was walking downhill through a gully I didn't remember crossing on the way up. I checked my GPS, but the signal was bouncing. The compass showed I was heading southeast, not southwest. I had somehow gotten off the trail. I turned back and tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same. Trees, rocks, ferns. I felt a cold knot of panic forming in my gut. I forced myself to sit down, pull out the map, and take stock. I stayed there for half an hour trying to reorient myself. Eventually, I found what I thought was the right path and started moving again. But after an hour, I reached a small stream that was flowing the wrong direction. That confirmed it. I was lost. Not badly lost, at least not yet. I had supplies and I wasn't injured, but I was in deep forest with spotty GPS and no trail. I checked my phone. No signal. I decided to keep walking west, knowing that eventually I'd hit a road or creek or something that would help guide me back. That was the worst decision I could have made. I pushed through dense brush, crossed a steep ravine, and climbed a slope that seemed to go on forever. By the time I reached the top, my legs were jelly, and I was drenched in sweat. I stopped for water and checked the GPS again. Still bouncing. Then I heard something. A whistle. It was faint, far off, but real. Just 2 tones. A high pitch, then a low one. My blood ran cold. It was the middle of nowhere. No one was supposed to be out here. I waited, not sure what to do. Then it happened again. Same pattern. I called out instinctively, but no answer came. Just silence. Then the whistle repeated, louder this time, closer. I stood up and started walking fast in the opposite direction, heart pounding. I didn't know who or what was making that sound, but I didn't want to find out. I moved quickly but carefully, trying to avoid making noise. I was now heading downhill into a thick, shadowy valley. As I reached the bottom, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. It was a piece of clothing hanging from a low tree branch, a torn jacket sleeve, faded red, dirty and old, like it had been there for years. Below it, half buried in leaves, was a rusted camping stove. This wasn't just some random part of the woods. Someone had camped here, maybe more than once, maybe not recently. I moved past it, but with every step I felt like I was walking deeper into something I shouldn't be part of. The trees here were so thick they blocked out most of the light. The air was damp and cold, and my breath fogged out in front of me. I felt watched, constantly. Every rustle of leaves made me flinch. That night, I set up my tent in a tight cluster of trees. I didn't eat. I just drank a little water and tried to rest. I kept hearing sounds, small ones, a soft knock, a shuffle, a distant crack. Couldn't sleep. I was too afraid to even close my eyes. At one point, I thought I saw a shadow pass between the trees, maybe 30 feet from my tent. It moved slow, too slow. Then it stopped. I waited, barely breathing. I didn't move. After maybe a minute, it was gone. I stayed awake until daylight. The next morning, I packed up and ran. I didn't care what direction. I just needed to get out. The trees were tighter now, the air colder. My GPS was useless. My map was no help here. The land didn't match the contours. I must have gotten turned around more times than I realized. I climbed a ridge and saw what looked like a dirt road far in the distance. It was hard to see through the trees, but I thought I saw straight lines, maybe tire tracks. I pushed toward it, fast, stumbling and tripping over roots and rocks. It took me hours to get close, but when I reached it, I saw it wasn't a road. It was a long, overgrown trench, maybe an old logging cut or fire break. But it was deep, too deep, and down in it I saw bones. Not animal bones. They were human, not one set, several, scattered, some half-buried, some clean, one still wearing a moldy boot. I fell back, heart racing. I've always liked hiking alone. Something about the quiet, the space, the movement. Walking for hours with just the sounds of birds, wind, and the crunch of gravel under my boots. It cleared my head in ways nothing else could. No talking, no phone, no noise. Just me, a backpack, and the trail. This one happened in the fall of 2022. I had taken a few days off work to get away. I picked a stretch of trail in northern Washington state, about 6 hours from where I lived. I didn't know much about it, only that it wasn't popular, wasn't too far from a lake, and ran through some thick, quiet forests. I found it online through a forum post where a guy had mentioned it as peaceful and remote. That was enough for me. I packed my bag, filled my bottles, loaded up on dried food, and left early on a Thursday morning. I parked at the small dirt lot by noon and was on the trail 20 minutes later. The first few miles were calm. There were no other cars in the lot, and I didn't pass a single person on the trail. It was overcast, and the sun peeked through now and then, lighting up yellow leaves that had fallen on the trail. The wind was low, and everything smelled like pine and wet soil. After about 3 hours of hiking, I came to a split. The trail wasn't marked well, but I had a downloaded map on my phone and a paper copy tucked in a plastic sleeve. According to the map, the right trail looped around toward the lake and eventually reconnected with the main trail. The left trail, which looked a little overgrown, went up higher into the forest and didn't connect to anything except a thin line marked old logging path. No reviews, no info. Most people would have gone right, but I didn't see any signs of recent traffic that way. No footprints, no crushed leaves, no broken branches. The left trail had faint boot prints, old ones maybe a week old. Something about that made me curious. I don't know why. I guess I just liked the idea of being where others hadn't gone in a while. I checked my pack. Plenty of water, GPS signal still strong. No bad weather in the forecast. I figured I'd go left, explore for a while, and turn around before sunset. The trail got narrow fast. It rose steadily, climbing a ridge that overlooked the lower valley. Trees got thicker, and the sounds of birds faded. It wasn't eerie at first, just quiet in a way that made you notice your own breathing. I hiked for another 2 miles before stopping to eat. Sat on a log, ate a protein bar, drank some water, looked around. That's when I noticed something strange. A piece of fabric, maybe part of a jacket or shirt, was snagged on a branch about 10 feet off the trail. It was faded green, torn, and had dirt smudges across it. At first, I figured it had blown off someone's pack. But when I walked over to look, I saw that the edges weren't ripped from wind. They were jagged, like it had been pulled or sliced. Maybe someone got caught on the tree. Still, it felt odd. The way it hung there, untouched, like it had been there for months. I put it back and moved on. By 4:30, I was about 7 miles in. I hadn't seen any wildlife besides a few squirrels and a crow that kept following above me, landing on branches, then flapping ahead. The path had changed too, less of a trail now and more like a faint footpath. I checked the GPS again. It still showed the old logging route ahead, but I had veered a little off course. That's when I should have turned back, but I was stubborn. The trail dipped suddenly, then rose again sharply. I slipped once on loose dirt and fell sideways into some bushes. Got a cut on my palm. Nothing serious, but annoying. I washed it with water, wrapped it with a strip of cloth, and kept walking. The air felt colder now, the kind of cold that feels out of place, like a patch of chill air that shouldn't be there. Around 5:15, I noticed something else. The forest floor had changed. More moss, less leaf cover, and the trees were wider apart. There was this large dead tree off to the left, lying across some rocks. I remember it clearly because there were deep marks on it, big gouges, maybe from a tool or claws. Not fresh, but still sharp. I thought about bears, but it didn't look like claw marks. It looked like someone had taken a blade to it. That's when I found the boot. It was old, cracked, partly buried under leaves. A hiking boot, dark brown, laces torn. Inside was a chewed-up sock. No foot. I looked around but saw no sign of anyone. No bags, no trash, nothing. Just the boot, like someone had dropped it months ago. I left it alone and walked faster. My gut had started to twist. That's how I knew something was wrong. It got darker quicker than I expected. The trees blocked out most of the light, and the clouds rolled in thicker. I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on. I knew I needed to find a spot to make camp or turn back fast. I decided to go a bit farther up the trail to reach a flat area I saw on the map. Figured I'd camp there for the night. When I reached the spot around 6 o'clock, I was sweating. Not from heat, but stress. I kept hearing snapping sounds behind me. Not the normal kind. These were short, sudden, like someone stepping on dry twigs. I stopped walking, listened. Nothing. I'd start again. Then 5 minutes later, another snap. Each time I turned around, there was nothing. No animals, no wind, nothing. I set up my tent fast, ate another protein bar, didn't cook anything. I didn't even light a fire. Something felt off. The kind of feeling that creeps up your spine when you're being watched. I sat in the tent with the flashlight on, reading the map again and again, trying to plan the quickest way back down. There was no cell service here. I turned off the flashlight, laid down, and waited. I kept the zipper half open, listening. Nothing moved. No wind. No animals. No bugs. Just silence. Around midnight, I heard breathing. Not mine. It was slow, steady, coming from outside the tent. I stayed still, tried not to breathe loud. The breathing lasted for maybe a full minute. Then it stopped. I unzipped the tent a few inches and looked out with my flashlight. Nothing. Just trees. No prints, no figures. But I knew someone, or something, had been standing just outside. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sky lightened, I packed my gear and left. I took the same trail back, or at least I thought I did. The ground had changed overnight. Leaves covered the path I had made. I walked fast, trying to keep calm, but the snapping came back. Behind me, closer. I didn't stop this time. I just kept going, checking my GPS every few minutes. The signal flickered now and then, which didn't help. I walked for hours. No break, no food. I just wanted to get out. I passed the dead tree again, past the boot again, but something had changed. The boot was gone. I swear it was the exact same place, but now it was just bare dirt and leaves. That's when I saw it, scratches on a nearby tree. Long, thin, straight lines running up the trunk, about 6 feet high, like someone had dragged a blade along the bark. Fresh ones, the sap still wet. I didn't stop, just kept walking, heart pounding. By early afternoon, I saw the fork again. The main trail. Relief hit me hard. I ran. Didn't even care about my knees hurting. I reached the trailhead by 3:30 and found my car still there, untouched. When I got inside and locked the doors, I sat there for a long time, just shaking. I didn't even start the engine. I just stared out at the trees, wondering what I had walked into. I never reported it. Who would I tell? No crime, no evidence. Just a boot, some scratches, and breathing in the dark. But I never went back. Never hiked alone again either. I still think about that path, that boot, and the breathing. Sometimes when I'm in bed and it's quiet, too quiet, I feel that same cold air on my neck. And I wonder who or what was following me that day. Or if they're still out there, waiting at that fork in the trail for someone else to take the left path. I had been hiking solo for years, mostly out in the northern stretches of the Cascades and sometimes down into Utah when I wanted dry sun. I always told myself I preferred being alone on the trail because it helped me clear my head. I liked the quiet, the stillness, and the way your thoughts slowed down when the only sounds around you were wind through pines and the crunch of your boots. It was early September when I planned a trip through a part of eastern Oregon I hadn't explored before. There was a region near a small mountain range, nothing massive, just a few modest peaks, dry forests, and high desert. I had found an old trail system through some national forest land that didn't show up on most current hiking apps, but it did show up on a few older topographic maps. That was part of the appeal. I wanted to get away from people, from campsites with other hikers around. I wanted to go somewhere quiet and untouched. I figured I'd hike in about 15 miles over 2 days, stay 1 or 2 nights, and come back. I loaded up with everything I needed: water purifier, stove, food for 4 days in case I stayed longer or got delayed, bear spray, compass, backup GPS, satellite emergency beacon, and my old canvas tent. I checked weather reports. It was clear. No storms expected. Nights would drop into the 40s, but that was nothing new to me. I parked my truck near an unmarked gravel pull-off just after sunrise. The trailhead was more like a narrow path disappearing into a patch of waist-high grass behind a barbed wire fence that looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades. I climbed over, checked my bearings, and set off. The first day was uneventful in the best way. The trail was faint but visible. I followed an old cattle trail for a while, then crossed a dry stream bed with rocks as smooth as river stones. It looked like it only ran wet during snowmelt or heavy rain. I passed a grove of dead trees that had clearly burned years ago. Charred trunks stood like black matchsticks, and dry needles covered the ground like brown snow. I made it about 8 miles in by mid-afternoon and set up camp on a small ridge with a view of the forested slope below. I boiled water, ate instant rice and beans, and sat for a while, listening. No planes, no cars. Just the wind and the occasional cracking of something in the brush far below. That night, I barely slept, mostly because I wasn't used to the total silence. I heard small animals outside my tent, maybe rabbits or deer. Nothing big, nothing threatening, but my mind stayed alert. The next morning I got up, made coffee, and packed up early. I planned to hike another 5 or 6 miles and make camp near a spot marked Dry Creek Cabin on the old topo map. There wasn't any clear cabin symbol, just the words scratched faintly next to a bend in the creek. By noon, I was maybe 2 miles from it, deep into a valley where the path disappeared and reappeared between dry brush and sharp rocks. The terrain got rougher. The sun was hotter down in the valley. I started to see more animal tracks, hoof prints, probably elk, and paw prints that might have been coyotes. Some looked older, some recent. I kept moving. By the time I reached the area marked on the map, I was sweating and tired. My legs ached. There was no visible cabin, just rocks, brush, and a slight dip in the land where the dry creek twisted between boulders and sand. I scanned the tree line for signs of wood or metal, anything man-made. After circling a few times, I found it. A collapsed structure half buried in thorns and dust. It wasn't really a cabin anymore. It looked like an old ranger shack, maybe 10 by 10 feet in size originally, with parts of the roof caved in and most of the walls rotted. Rusted hinges, a few beams still upright, and bits of a metal bed frame twisted inside. I didn't go in, but I did clear a spot nearby to pitch my tent. That afternoon was quiet, almost too quiet. No birds, no insects buzzing, just heat. Felt like the whole place was waiting. I tried to ignore it. I gathered a few branches for a fire, even though I didn't need one to cook. I just wanted something to do. I cooked dinner early, ate, and lay back against my backpack, staring up through the trees. That night was different. I woke around 2 a.m. to a sound. Not rustling, not a deer stepping through brush. It was a heavy, deliberate snap, like a large branch cracking under weight. Then silence. Then another one, closer. I stayed frozen in my sleeping bag. I reached slowly for the bear spray beside me. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my neck. Another crack, then what sounded like breathing. Not huffing like a bear, just slow, steady breath. I didn't move. I didn't unzip the tent. I just listened, every muscle tight. After what felt like an hour but was probably 10 minutes, the sound moved off. I didn't sleep again, not even a little. In the morning, I forced myself out and checked the area. I found nothing. No tracks, no signs of a large animal. Just my own footprints and some dried grass trampled by my boots the day before. I decided not to go further in. I didn't feel right. I packed up, checked my gear twice, and started heading back the way I came. My plan was to retrace my steps and be out by the following day. But things went wrong. About 5 miles out, somewhere past the burned grove I'd passed on the way in, I noticed I wasn't seeing any familiar landmarks. No scorched trees, no cairns I'd made to mark a turn. I stopped, checked my GPS, and realized it wasn't syncing, just frozen. I checked the compass, spun wildly in my hand. I tried to stay calm. I had a backup compass buried in my bag. I dug it out and checked it, same thing, just spinning. At first, I thought maybe I'd walked past some natural iron deposit or something. But I moved 50 yards in each direction, and the compass still spun. I turned back to follow the trail I thought I'd come from, but it was gone. No visible path, no prints, just rock, shrubs, and silence. I wasn't panicking yet. I knew how to bushwhack and find my way out. I still had water, food, and gear. I could survive a few extra days if I had to, but the silence started getting to me. No birds, no wind, just heat. The trees looked wrong, too similar, like someone had copied and pasted them across the slope. No matter how far I walked, the terrain didn't seem to change. I kept circling back to the same dry tree, the same split boulder, the same flat patch of earth with red dust. That night, I didn't set up camp. I sat with my back to a tree and kept my headlamp on low. I dozed in 10-minute bursts. I heard movement again, soft this time, always just out of sight, like something was walking wide circles around me. The next morning, I was stiff and sore and more exhausted than I'd ever been. I picked a direction downhill and forced myself to keep going, watching the sun for guidance. By noon, I found a small stream, barely a trickle, but enough to refill my water. I filtered and drank. I sat in the shade for a while and felt a little better. Then I saw the boot print. First, I thought it was mine, but it was too small. Narrower, maybe a size 8. I wear a 12. It was recent too. Edges still crisp in the soft dirt. Someone else was nearby. I looked around. Nothing, just trees. I called out, but my voice felt wrong in the air, like it didn't carry, just dropped. I followed the print, then another, all spaced evenly, like someone walking in a straight line, same pace. But after about 200 yards, they just stopped.
No final, step.
No sign of turning or backtracking, just ended in the middle of open dirt. I stood there, staring down, feeling something twist in my stomach. I turned and walked the opposite way. I didn't want to know. That night, I found a small ridge and camped under a rock outcrop. I built a fire, not for cooking, just for comfort. I used up more wood than I needed. I didn't sleep. I watched the tree line all night. I don't know how many days passed like that. I stopped counting after the 5th. I kept moving, eating less, drinking just enough to stay upright. I kept thinking I'd find the trail, the road, something. But all I found were more signs that something was wrong. Trees carved with markings that didn't make sense. Straight lines stacked vertically, like tallies, sometimes dozens of them on one trunk. Bones in piles, small ones, birds or squirrels, arranged in circles. Once I saw what looked like an old jacket hanging from a branch, faded and shredded by sun and time. I didn't touch it. The worst was the 3rd night after I got lost. I had climbed down into a dry ravine, thinking it might lead somewhere, and just as I was about to make camp, I saw lights. 2 pinpoints of yellow, maybe half a mile up the ridge. Like headlights. I froze. Part of me wanted to run toward them, yell, wave my light. But I waited. I watched. The lights didn't move. They stayed there, still and low. After 20 minutes, I turned my head to get my pack. When I looked back, they were gone. I didn't sleep again that night. The next day, I finally found something. It was late afternoon. I was climbing a slope I thought I recognized. My legs felt like lead. My lips cracked from sun and wind.